Mimir's Well presents The EXILED Lord, A Brother's Betrayal. Production by Björn Maxe. Story and idea by Björn Maxe. Written by Björn Maxe and Denton Walter. Narrated by Denton Walter.
The wine was exquisite. It had a sting when it hit the tongue, but smooth as silk when it went down the throat. A beverage fit for one of his standing. Tostig, Earl of Northumbria, drained the cup and set it back on the table. He was pleased with himself, as indeed he should be. Everything was now as he wanted it. Life was good. That had not been the case previously. A decade before, he had been in exile, forced from England along with his wife, his father, and two of his brothers, driven across the sea to seek sanctuary in his wife's home of Flanders. The memory of that humiliation still festered inside him, along with the desire for a suitable revenge, should the opportunity arise. But much had happened in the years since then. After a year in exile, he and his family had returned from Flanders, with an army behind them, receiving support at home from his powerful and influential brother, Earl Harold of Wessex, as well as many of the other nobles. They had forced King Edward, so boringly pious that the people called him the Confessor, to actually practice some of the Christian virtues he valued so highly and restore the good name of the Godwin family, returning their lands and their titles, things that should never have been taken from them in the first place. What did they do, after all? Nothing. Nothing to warrant banishment. Yes, Earl Godwin had opposed King Edward's policies at every turn, conspired against him, and nearly brought on a civil war, but that had been the king's fault. Clearly it was the king who was responsible for having bad policies, not Earl Godwin. And what had he himself done, Tostig thought? He supported his father. He did a son's duty, nothing more, and yet he was exiled for doing his duty. He could not forget that insult, though things had worked out well for him since then. After the death of Earl Siward, he had been given the earldom of Northumbria, and for almost 10 years now he had ruled it from his palace in the city of York with a firm hand. Northumbria needed a man like him to rule it, one who tolerated no question to his authority, since it was a land beset by centuries-old conflicts that still simmered below the surface. Its people, a mix of Danes who had once ruled there as part of the Danelaw, and Saxons who had remained after the Danish conquest, both groups secretly wanting nothing more than to kill each other for events long past, though they still managed to coexist peacefully, as a rule. Tostig could have used his own heritage to ease his rule, and to join the two factions, since he was half Saxon and half Danish himself, his father, Earl Godwin, the most powerful Saxon nobleman in England, and his mother a Dane, Gytha Thorkelstottir. But he preferred stronger measures, and anyway the Northumbrian nobles, a mix of Saxon and Dane, who should have seen him as one of them, instead resented him, seeing him as some sort of foreigner, simply because he came from the southern part of England, the first Earl who wasn't a northerner. But what had that to do with anything? He ruled them well, ruled them strongly, yet they were always complaining and scheming to undermine his rule, never understanding the legitimate force required to control the lower orders. His policy of simply executing all criminals, for example, had made the roads safe for merchants to travel, yet they still complained. The common people, and even some of the nobles, seemed to have no regard for his God-given right to tax them, and to raise those taxes whenever he saw fit. The people themselves forcing him to use justifiable methods to collect his dues, and then having the nerve to rise in local revolts, claiming that he was being excessive, thus forcing him to be excessive. But while this had not earned him any favour with the small folk, some manner of peace had been secured, and, most importantly, the taxes had been collected. But the nobles were worse than the small folk. They, after all, should know better, and the Danish ones, they were the worst of all, resenting the fact that they had always paid less tax than the Saxons under previous earls, an arrangement dating back to the days of the Danelaw, something that he had done away with, making them pay the same. Why should he lose payment he was entitled to, simply to follow some outdated ideas? But they murmured, they complained, he heard rumours of rebellion. He had dealt with that problem, however, killing some of them as an example to the others that rank and privilege did not give them the right to challenge their earl. He had learned well from his father's example, when Alfred the Atheling had tried to seize the crown from King Harold Harefoot, and Earl Godwin had pretended friendship, lured Alfred to a meeting, then blinded him and gave him to King Harold, before rounding up all of Alfred's retainers, blinding, maiming, scalping, and then executing them. Guided by his father's example, Tostig had invited two of the murmurers, Gamel and Ulf, both of them of Danish descent, to visit him in York under the promise of safe conduct, as he wished to discuss various issues with them. They had come like lambs to the slaughter. He smiled at the memory of it. It had been so simple. Instead of the promised feast, they had been seized, stripped, and beheaded in public for all to see, their bodies then tossed into the river, and their heads displayed on spikes as a warning to others. That seemed to have had a sobering effect on the other nobles, and there had been peace since then, at least from his own nobles, though popular resentment was growing once again. But there were other problems. King Edward was not pleased at how little time Tostig ever bothered to spend at the royal court, nor was the king impressed with the deteriorating situation along the Scottish border, the security of which was the responsibility of Northumbria. But Scottish raiders seemed to cross the old Roman wall with impunity, looting, burning, and killing extensively all along the border, while Tostig's efforts to prevent it were decidedly ineffective. The Scottish king, Malcolm III, was a personal friend of his, which gave him little incentive to take action, nor did he find it easy to raise enough local levies to fight for him, having to bring in Danish housecarls to support him, which did nothing to help his popularity. In any case, the Earl of Northumbria was far too busy attending to more important matters than Scottish raiders, such as collecting the tax from his subjects. He had been worried about all of that, but he felt confident now, since his brother Harold had the ear of the king, who relied on him more and more for advice. That was good. Yes, things were as he wanted them. He would make any problem disappear as easily as he had done before. Harold's influence with the king would see to that. He took up the decorative silver wine jug, but it felt light. It was empty. His displeasure at that discovery rose instantly. Hatab! Hatab, where are you? Miserable wretch. I need more wine. Something to eat, too. He heard one of the housecarls relay the message down the hall, and while he waited, he returned to reading the parchments that lay before him, reports from his commanders. More talk of uprisings, discontented thanes, grumbling small folk once again. Well, they would be dealt with severely, and Brother Harold would make it good with King Edward. All would be well. The awaited jug of wine finally arrived, carried by Tostig's personal servant, Hatab. It's about bloody time. What took you so long? Did you go off and grow the grapes yourself?
Apologies, my lord. I had to open a fresh barrel. You seem to have had a little bit of a thirst lately, if I may say so.
You may not. Don't blame me for your tardiness. Go and bring me some freshly baked bread, and cheese, and bring it today.
Yes, my lord. At once.
Be quick about it, you useless goose. The servant scurried off, fearing his master's famously short temper. passing the captain of Tostig's household guards in the doorway, who almost knocked him over. Anlon, a huge Irishman who looked as though he might be the offspring of a giant, stormed in without any ceremony, looking decidedly worried. "My lord, there's trouble in the city." "Well, then deal with it. That's what I pay you for. The unwashed peasants again, protesting, having to pay their just dues, I suppose." "Aye, them too. But sure, aren't they following the Thanes? It's the Thanes that are causing the trouble this time, my lord, but the small folk are behind them." "The Thanes? The Thanes of York?" Them as well, my lord, and all the others. All the Thanes of Northumbria, and their retainers, plus the devil knows who else. It seems they want your head on a spike over the gate. Sure, no, we could hold them off for a while. But if you'll take my advice, my lord, you'll get your arse out of York as fast as you can. If that is, you want to keep it." Tostig had no choice but to flee, as the Thanes of Northumbria occupied the city, killing all the officials who had carried out his unjust orders, as well as anyone who had supported him. They declared him an outlaw for his crimes, and they sent for Morcar, the younger brother of Edwin, Earl of Mercia, choosing him as the new Earl of Northumbria. Morcar and the rebel Thanes marched south, intending to lay their grievances before King Edward, being joined by Earl Edwin and his forces at the city of Nottingham. But there their journey ended. They had no need to continue it, for word had reached King Edward, and he had sent Earl Harold of Wessex north to meet them, unescorted by any military force, so as to show he meant them no harm for their rebellion, but merely wished to hear their reasons for it. Tostig's fate now lay in the hands of his brother, the brother whose influence at the royal court had so far assisted him to maintain his grip on Northumbria. He felt confident. But Harold was as different from his brother as chalk and cheese. He was a fair and decent man, and when he heard from the northern Thanes of Tostig's abuses, his harsh taxes, his treatment of the small folk, his thefts from the church, and the cowardly murder of Gamel and Ulf, the bond between the brothers was broken forever. Having assured the Thanes that Tostig could never again rule them, Harold hurried south to Oxford, where the royal council was due to meet, and there he recounted the things he had heard to King Edward, expecting him to share the anger he felt himself. But King Edward had always been fond of Tostig. Queen Edith was Tostig's sister, and the royal couple, instead of condemnation, wanted the rebellion put down and the earl restored. But Harold, who had given his word to the Thanes, persisted, listing Tostig's abuses. He stressed the thefts from the church. Surely that would move the pious Edward. Eventually the king conceded. Tostig's behaviour had gone beyond royal friendship. The queen, too, could no longer support her brother. Edward upheld the choice of the northern lords, accepting Morcar as Earl of Northumbria, and officially recognising Tostig's deposition. But Tostig refused to accept the king's decision, for which disobedience he was outlawed by royal decree. But Edward still felt something for Tostig, and tried to be lenient, giving the angry former earl a chance to explain himself, summoning him to a meeting of the royal council. There Tostig learned that the king had supported him, the queen too, and it had been Harold. Harold, the brother he had relied on, who had persuaded King Edward to take action against him. Furious, he publicly accused Harold of actually causing the uprising against him, claiming that his own brother had treacherously fomented unrest against his rule. His wild and clearly untrue accusations resulted in him being exiled from England, and set in motion events that would bring about changes that at that time would have seemed beyond belief. He left the council filled with an uncontrollable hatred for Harold, and a thirst for revenge burning in his mind. Tostig made arrangements to take his family, and those few others still loyal to him, to the safety he knew he would find with his brother-in-law, Count Baldwin of Flanders. They had already boarded the ship, when Anlon noticed a group of armed men approaching. He drew his sword and ordered the small force of housecarls still in Tostig's service to form up. Shield wall, lads. Now I'm warning you lot, whoever you are. Be prepared to meet the devil himself if you're here to harm my lord.
If I wanted him dead, Irishman, the worms would already be feasting upon his rotting corpse.
Forgive me, Earl Harold. I didn't see you there. Stand down, lads. Harold? Harold stepped out from the group of soldiers, raising his hand to stop them, and came forward. Tostig could see. Was it just tiredness, or was it genuine sadness in his brother's blue eyes? He too came forward, the brothers meeting on the quayside. There they stood in silence for a moment, the once proud sons of Godwin, now on different paths that led to a destination only God knew.
I am here, brother, just to make sure that you and your family will depart in safety. I want no harm to come to you or them, and whatever it is that you may think, it was my hand, not King Edward's pity, that kept the knife from your throat once you left the council. How long do you think that you would have lived as an outlaw, with any man that you met entitled to kill you?
Oh, so I should rejoice then, should I? Be happy that my own brother sends me into exile once more, and is kind enough to keep me alive, so that I may enjoy it? You are truly a fool, Harold. A snivelling little lapdog to a weak king. Why are you really here? Harold sighed and handed a leather parchment case to his brother.
Here is the royal proclamation of your banishment. Do not blame this on me. You brought it upon yourself. You almost dragged our family once more into royal disfavour, just as father did. Strong and influential as he was, yet headstrong and arrogant, just as you are. He should have not created the unrest then, and nor should you now. We need to be united, as one people. There is a great deal at stake. The king's health is poor, and I fear that he may not live much longer. And you know who waits across the sea in Normandy. And our family.
Oh, please. I think I'm going to cry. Spare me that talk, brother. You just want to please your new Norman master, the bastard duke of a realm of bastards who played you like a pipe, tricking you into promising him the throne. Keep your speech, it means nothing to me. I bear no responsibility for this. It is you! You! I hold you responsible for my fate. You ran to Edward as fast as you could. You poisoned him against me. You turned my own sister against me. Well, you may rest assured that you haven't seen the last of me.
You are a fool, Tostig. And no matter how many times you fail, oh, we have an abundance of your failures. You just fail again. The only reason that you yet live is the love that I bear our mother. But then again, she would probably forgive me if I sent you to our Lord in heaven earlier than intended.
The slap came out of nowhere. The soldiers brought up their shields and drew their swords, ready to defend their respective lords. Harold smiled as he wiped the blood from his lip, then straightened himself up, controlling his emotions with difficulty.
And that just proves my point. You are unfit to bear the name of Godwin, and I would advise you to leave now, before I send you and your men to hell.
The soldiers stood, eyeing one another anxiously, waiting for an order or the next move from the other side. Anlin came to the side of his lord and put a hand on his shoulder. Your family's waiting for you on the ship, Lord. They're what's important now. We'd best leave while we still can. So we shall. He's not worth a fight. Farewell, Harold. You tell me I fail. Well, so do you. You failed England a year ago, didn't you? At least I never promised some Norman bastard the throne of England, but you did. And now you have failed again. You failed again now because you should have had me killed. That's all I have to say to you. my dear brother Harold.
My lord, it is Earl Harold to you. You are nothing but an outlaw, with no standing now, and you will address me accordingly. Now get out of my sight before I take your advice and kill you.
Tostig turned and climbed aboard the ship as the crew cast off the ropes, nervously watching Harold's soldiers, but they made no move to interfere. Harold knew Tostig was right. Yes, he had been tricked into promising the throne to the Norman Duke, and yes, he should have killed Tostig. But despite everything the man had done, he was still his brother. He walked sadly away, as the ship bearing a brother he would never see again, a brother he had loved, headed for the open sea. Though it was November, the sea was calm, the vessel making a safe passage to Flanders, and soon Tostig and his family arrived at Gravenstein Castle, where he was warmly welcomed by Count Baldwin. But Tostig had no intention of just accepting the hospitality of Flanders for the rest of his life. He wanted revenge. He needed revenge. And he knew of one man who could give it to him, Duke William of Normandy. Help William to gain the throne so foolishly promised to him by Harold, and at the very least the Duke would make him Earl of Wessex. He wrote to William, urging him to attack England at once, and offering his assistance, his knowledge of England that would be so helpful. The response was far from what he'd expected. Duke William was not yet ready to invade England, and why should he? England was already his by divine right. Earl Harold had sworn on holy relics to support his claim on the death of King Edward, and he would have to honour that sacred oath. Should he refuse, of course, well, then an invasion would be necessary. But until then, William had no need for the assistance of an exiled lord, and one he didn't particularly trust. Not wanting to wait for William to realize he would have to fight for the English throne, since Harold would never give it to him, an impatient and frustrated Tostig thought of another who could assist him. A pagan, too. What would King Edward make of that? A pagan with a great military reputation and wealth beyond that most men had achieved. King Harald Sigurdsson of Norway, a man they called the Hard Ruler. And he had a genuine claim to the throne of England, albeit a rather tenuous one. Edward the Confessor had seized the throne following the sudden and highly suspicious death of Harthacnut, the son of Canute the Great, but Harthacnut had named King Magnus of Norway as his heir, and Edward had kept the throne of England only because Magnus had chosen not to bother fighting for it, being occupied with other matters at the time, as well as later negotiations with Edward that convinced Magnus that he was indeed heir to the English throne. As successor to Magnus, Harold considered that right had passed to him. With men and a fleet of ships lent to him by Count Baldwin, Tostig set out on a mission of revenge, destruction, and death against the country that had cheated him and the brother who had betrayed him. A brother who now sat upon the throne of England. King Edward's health had failed after Tostig's departure. He died shortly afterwards, and the Witan had elected Harold as king. And Harold had no intention of honouring his oath to give Duke William the throne. William should have listened to him, Tostig thought, and invaded when he had his offer of help. But no matter. He would bring death and destruction upon the land of England, and the earldom of Wessex would still be his reward. If not from a Norman bastard, it would be just as welcome bestowed by a pagan from the northern lands. He sailed up the southern coast of England, raiding towns and villages from the Isle of Wight to Kent, in search of coin and provisions, and inflicting some petty revenge on the small folk who lived there, though they had played no part in his downfall. But he was forced to flee when King Harold sent the powerful Saxon navy against him, so he turned his ships northward. He attempted to persuade his brother Garth, Earl of East Anglia, to join him, but his entreaties fell on deaf ears, his brother, now a staunch supporter of King Harold, wanting nothing to do with him. Smarting from his brother's rebuff, he sailed on up the coast, raiding Norfolk and Lindsey with some success, before attempting to do the same further north in his own former territory. But there his fortunes took a turn for the worse, for he met the combined forces of Edwin and Lorca, and lacking a sufficiently strong force himself, he was soundly defeated. Following that, most of his surviving men, seeing that his cause was hopeless, deserted him, leaving him powerless. He could hardly return to Count Baldwin and ask for more men and ships, having lost most of those he'd already been given. He was desperate. But there was still one man he could depend on for help, one he could trust, his old friend King Malcolm III of Scotland, known as the Kenmore, the great chief. With nowhere else to go, he sailed on to the land of the Scots and presented himself at the court of King Malcolm. There he was treated as he would wish to be, as he had been before Harold had taken everything away from him, treated like the noble lord he was. A sumptuous feast was prepared on his arrival, and he was heartily welcomed by the Scottish king with handshakes and hugs. "Welcome, old friend Tostig. I hope your travels have been pleasant." "Indeed they have not, my lord. I am no longer even an earl. My title and land stripped from me, exiled from England, banished at the behest of my power-hungry brother, he who incited the Thanes to rise against me in the first place, and then lied about me to that weak excuse for a king, Edward the bloody confessor. He even turned my own sister into my enemy, made a brother reject me, and now he sits upon the throne of England, elected by the wit and the very Thanes he incited against me. That was his intention all along. I know it. Oh, but at least it is a pleasure to be in your company once again, my friend. The only pleasure I have. But sorry I am to hear that, my friend. And let me assure you, whatever the Sassenachs may think about you, you'll always be a nobleman to me. Ha, Anlin, you big Irish bastard! Come here, you! My lord, we're most grateful for your hospitality, so we are. Well, you're always welcome here, you know that. And I hope you brought your famous appetite for good meat and ale with you, because there's a mighty feast prepared for you. Come now, eat, drink, and maybe forget your troubles for a while. Tostig, sit yourself by me. You too, Anglin. But I'm warning you, don't you drink everything. Leave a wee dram for me. Food in plenty was served in the hall. It was a simple but large hall, not overly luxurious, nor overly warm, despite the fires that had been lit. But the warmth that came from the king himself made up for it. Always laughing and cheering, asking for this tune and that tune, dancing, even engaging in an arm wrestling contest with Anlin, which he lost, but laughed about it all the same. Well, damn you, you big Irish ox! You tore the arm off me! Have some more ale. Listen, if you don't mind, I'd like a few words with Tostig, alone. Sure, of course, my lord. Not a bother. Excuse me. And thanks for the contest. You just needed a little more ale in here. You've been fine, so you would. Excuse me. Ale? I thought we have an abundance, so I'll have you the next time. Now, you see if you can find a comely wench to keep your arse warm, you big fucker. The Irishman wobbled unsteadily, bowed towards the king and his lord, and went to carry out the royal command, weaving slightly as he walked. King Malcolm took a big swig of wine, laid the mug upon the table, then turned to Tostig, lowering his voice. Now, what are you really here for? I know it's just that my cheery company, great though that may be. I need your help, my lord. I have been disgraced, humiliated by my own brother, that greedy little rat. I seek revenge. I want Harold to rue the day he betrayed me for the crown of England. The day he turned even my sister against me. The day he poisoned me in the minds of my brothers who now refuse to support me. It's sad I am to see you this way, Tostig, my friend. Now have some understanding for why your brother did as he did, but you should never turn against your own kin. I agree with you there. Now, what is it you want my help with? But before you answer me, know this. I'm not going to go to war against England, not even for you. I cannot risk my kingdom, nor my subjects, even for a friend. Though I have to thank you for doing so little along the border so we could raid across it. And I did leave you some nice spoils to collect, now didn't I? Aye, it was a good deal we had. Yes, quite profitable for both of us. And I will share with you any future good fortune that may come my way, I promise you that. But in advance of that, I require more warriors and more ships. I have another voyage to make, and I need to be impressively equipped when I reach my destination. Sailing off again? Well, you up to this time? Tostig smiled. It was a smile that would have frightened the most heroic warrior. He smiled at the thought of what he would unleash on his own people, the unholy retribution they so richly deserved. His weapon would be the fury of pagan warriors from the north, and the legendary man who would lead them. I'm going to Norway, to the true King of England, Harald Sigurdsson. He already considers himself heir to the throne. All I have to do is give him a little push in the right direction. In return for my help, all I shall seek is the honour of ruling the greatest earldom in England, ruling it for King Harold. The earldom of Wessex. King Malcolm sat back, looking at Tostig for some moments before he spoke. Aye, I'll give you a wee bit of advice, Tostig. That fella over there in Norway isn't famous for being exactly nice, if you know what I mean. And I hear if he doesn't like you, he'll shorten your height by a head. Now, what you do is this, and I'll help you. You send a messenger, not you, one you trust. Invite Harold to come here. And if he's interested in the throne of England, he'll come. And while you're waiting for him, build up your forces. Get men, get ships, so when he gets here, he sees a military force waiting for him, with a noble commander at the head of them. Not just one man, with a grudge and a handful of retainers. Tostig heeded the advice, King Malcolm giving his support, and soon warriors were answering his call for men. Local Scots, Norse settlers, men from the kingdom of Dyflin across the sea in Ireland who had land along the coast of Britain. Even some warriors from Orkney had arrived, fearsome-looking Norsemen who wanted nothing better than a good fight, and the possibility of riches and women afterwards. They promised further assistance from the two young jarls who ruled over Orkney, Paul and Earl and Thorfinson. And with them was a woman dressed as a warrior with mail and helmet, something Tostig had never seen before. Still, a sword killed, no matter the sex of the hand that held it. He had promised Malcolm some good raiding across the border in Northumbria in return for his help, since the northern thanes would be far too occupied fighting King Harold to bother about raiders, and even if they did, that would reduce the forces against him and help his victory. Weeks earlier, he had stood on the quayside, watching the ship depart, bearing Anlon with the most important letter he had ever written, a parchment that held his destiny in his words. His hopes, his fears, his very life was contained in that document case. The wind took the sail, billowing it out and displaying the royal sigil of Scotland. The timbers creaked, and the vessel began her journey, Anlon waving back happily as he stood beside the steersman. Tostig wasn't worried. King Harold would come, he had no doubt of that. The man saw himself as heir to the throne of England, and now the brother of England's king, a king he would see as an usurper, was offering him the throne. Yes, Harold would come. He looked out to sea, the ship now silhouetted against dark, ominous-looking clouds that were gathering on the horizon. A passing sailor, an elderly man well used to the sea, stopped, following Tostig's gaze. He shook his head, stroking his beard as he too eyed the gathering clouds.
There be a storm coming, I'm afraid, my lord.
Tostig almost laughed. How right the man was. There was a storm coming, one that would be remembered until the end of days. And he, Tostig, was the bringer of it. Men, women, children, high-born and small folk alike, all would feel its power. His power. And they would fear it. They would fear him.
Cast: Tostig Godwinson, Anne Lon, and Kin Malcolm is voiced by Denton Walter. Harold Godwinson is voiced by Eurasian Rob at castingcallclub.com. Hutharb and the Old Sailor, voiced by Björn Maxe. Music by Donheim, Franganga, Kevin MacLeod, Black Vortex, Malicious, Pippin the Hunchback, Clash Defiant, Moorland, and Rhino's Theme. Rodmund Wooddenning, Valhall. Special effects sounds: Michael Gelfi. Footman Army Marching, Military Snares Orders. Crowded Tavern, People Drinks, Adventures. Some music and effects have been altered for the ambience of the story. Special thanks to Tim W. Peterson, Tim Nilsson, Mark Lewis Spark, and of course my beloved wife Yuki. I truly hope that you have enjoyed this episode, and I wish that you will tune in for more episodes. In production right now is The Last Pagan Warrior. It's gonna be released around Christmas. Thank you very much for listening to this audio. I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I have been in creating it.